Before the video starts, I was asked by my producer, having failed to do so, to jump in and thank Amy, Theodora, Darren, Stephen, Gail, and Tattoo for your really nice contributions this past week. It's hugely appreciated. And Amy, I do note that yours was sent in as a thank you for some emailed documents like the Ang via Amari Duvall. So that's not required of anybody, but that's really a nice thing to have done, and appreciate that. So, and don't let anything interfere with your asking me for those documents. I'm not charging anybody for the documents that you hear me talk about from time to time in here as being available. All right, and then the second thing I was supposed to do is remind you, well, first of all, I wanted to jump in and say, it's nice to see that we suddenly have 5,000 subscribers. Big day for us. And we are planning to do our live stream on Sunday, January the 2nd. Okay, so that'll be the first date in 2022. One thing, though, that my producer wanted to do was see what are the best times of day and the best days of the week for live streams for you. At least in terms of time of day, we can make that happen for this next one. We are planning to do this next one on January 2nd. All right, so now enjoy the video. For the life of me, says Heather, and I'm going to blast this up on the full screen so you can see it. And this is going to give me a chance just to wander around and talk about drawing again in a couple different little ways, and maybe just expand on some things I've talked about. There's a list right here of various times I've covered drawing. Number 128, 129, 206, 245, 246. What is going on? I'm turning into a drawing discussing machine over here. But these are drawing styles, aspects of drawing. I don't know what the rest of that title was. Structures of painting, contour drawing, mass drawing, and a few of my favorite drawings. Those are the ones, in 251, I think the favorite drawings ones might be the most recent. But we're just going to talk about drawing again and showing you some images. But it starts with Degas. And let me just read quickly, let you read with me on this this long Heather comment. And what she says isn't that different from what most people are thinking. For the life of me, she says, I can't understand why you hold Degas in such high regard. His art sets my teeth on edge. I think it's important for me to reconcile this because without doing so, I will not be able to fully comprehend what you're saying. That's an insightful point. There are a few of his later pieces that I can appreciate, the aesthetic and his technique, but as for overall draftsmanship, I simply don't see it. To me, excellence in draftsmanship is, do I believe it? To explain my reticence, the man couldn't draw a horse if he had his head up his butt. I've cared for horses for over 40 years, and when I look at his representations, my reaction is they should shoot that poor thing. For me, you wouldn't want to understate anything here now, would you, Heather? Form and stride are so wrong. This is a woman who can portray the majesty and beauty of the horse, and then there's a website, and I'm not going to show this person's work. I don't think that's fair or appropriate, but you all can look at it if you'd like to on your own. I understand that her art is figurative and not impressionistic, but she has the draftsmanship that Degas doesn't. Now, this is the first time I've ever heard a person in modern times actually claiming draftsmanship. One of our own has a higher level of draftsmanship than Degas, who is among the tops of all time, according to most thinkers on the subject. But anyway, let me keep going. It goes on. I could pick on the spots, but I'm not going to do that. I guess I better not. But she has the draftsmanship that Degas doesn't. And it isn't just horses. In your video, a few of my favorite drawings, the Degas figures appear distorted to me. When I look at the one on the right, my instant reaction is elastic woman. To my eyes, she looks, by the way, that remember the Ang, the elastic woman, if you want to, the nude odalisque deformities, things like that. Not necessarily a thing that has anything to do with draftsmanship, so it's something to think about. To my eyes, she looks completely unnatural, whereas the Sargent figures are sublime. If you have the time, could you please help me and expand upon what you evaluate, why you evaluate Degas as a master draftsman? If I miss what you're seeing, then I feel I will be blocked from making progress. And then in further conversations, she said, please remember, and I asked her if she would mind if I show this quote and go ahead, use it as the takeoff point for this discussion. And she says, please remember, I have very limited understanding, so I speak with absolutely no reasonable basis for my thoughts about this. Heather, I do think it's a mistake to take the position that you have no reasonable basis. Looking with your own eyes is a reasonable basis. If you've seen horses, you may have a reasonable basis. The people that have the least reasonable basis are probably people who have been taught stuff about horses and what horses must look like, how you draw a horse and all that sort of thing. Those people may come into the room with prejudices about it, but you and your own experiences, that's the reasonable basis. That's what most people are, the laypersons who ultimately are the deciders. 100 years later, the people who are still buying those pictures are the ones that are deciding the fate of our art form, and most of them aren't painters. So don't ever underestimate the importance of every person taking a stand, shall we say, making his judgments, and then watching yourself as over time you gain greater insight. If you said, I'll do this again with wine. If you said, I don't know anything about wines or that sort of thing, that would be a fair statement. And then you've tasted a bunch of wines, right? So you've looked a lot, and you're judging, beginning to be able to be a judge. And you gradually are saying, man, those last 5 or 6 wines, that one was kind of okay, but now, and that's the value of your judgment. Not as valuable as if you don't have a lot of experience. But draftsmanship is one of those things that, so I titled this thing, I think, something to do with horses, Degas, and draftsmanship. I was sort of a takeoff on the Degas dance drawing book by Paul Valery, which you ought to read, by the way. I say you ought to read. I mean, I recommend it. Anyway, let's look at some pictures. I'm just going to wander rambling this time, possibly more than usual, and I'll take a bend in there that you wonder why I did it at a certain point. But I just started picking up pictures with thoughts in mind, and I really didn't want to get into a discussion with somebody the pictures that she sent are obviously done by somebody with a photograph in their hands, and maybe even from tracings of the photograph and things like a very modern thing to be doing with animals. I mean, with painting, with the new, art school kind of background. When drawing isn't actually what it used to be, when drawing isn't actually the interpretation of form, if you want to use Degas' phrase for it. But when you say interpretation of form, the presumption is that what you mean to say is you're trying to express on a flat surface those greater qualities that are three-dimensional as well. Some of that aspect of form, of course, is in shapiness, in the shape making. Other aspects of it are obviously in the form, in the management of gradations to express form ideas. And so let's just pick up, and I'll just follow thoughts that come to me as I look at these pictures. Some of I put these together in groups that made sense for some things, and then as I look at them, sometimes I'm looking at these videos and I completely get a different idea by looking at the forest. So you just have to live with that. So here's Degas and horses. Nothing about Degas, by the way, ought to be anything but a good example. I'm talking about his general life. Ought to be anything but a good example of what it is to be a student of our form. So here Degas is doing some early pictures with horses. And you can see him copying. These things look to be copies of Jericho. I mean, they could be copies of other painters, but they have the stylistic qualities of previous art. Now, you're talking about Degas, 1834. We're talking about a guy who certainly not, the photograph wasn't much of a thing until later in his life. So he wasn't going to photographs for information. He was going to what he had, which was paintings by Jericho, or perhaps in his day, Meissonier. Meissonier, I believe, is about the same age as him, so probably not Meissonier. That's a good one. I'm thinking about that. I should look that up. But so you can see what he is doing is he's doing studies from other people's works to get to know, shall we say, the horse. And the old model, was study, if you want to do some horse pictures, study horses. And it makes tons of sense, right? I mean, obviously, here's a guy who's learned something about drawing already, but he's now become a student for the purposes of a couple of these pictures. This one here looks like a Munnings, this lower one. And the one above is just very unique to Degas. Remember each of these pictures, too, I need to repeat this each time it happens, but these aren't Impressionist paintings in any sense of the word, if we mean painting a scene that sits before you as if it were a slice of life. They are, in other words, they are pictures built from pieces and parts and pieced together into a plausible unity. So, more or less, as you get further on past Monet, you realize that guys are actually being able to bring more color unity too, and more plausibility by way of the color and light thing too. So that's not to be underestimated. But nevertheless, just look at what he is as a student of drawing, and here he is studying the horse. So, and now for several of the early works, the one in the upper right. Is a study of some sort. So let me just talk about this. So this is a study. Now, this is what I call draftsmanship. This is actually a study where the guy's attempt is to actually express the shape and the volume. Now, people like to talk about volume, but that sense of mass, that's what we call the form in painting, not the form of the art, but the form meaning the modeling, as if you were making it sculptural. And Degas is a very good example of that. And he also, even early on, he gets to this point where he's actually, even though he can still be a little bit piecemeal, he actually has a sense of the great unity of the drawing, how the drawing hangs together. Does the whole drawing hang together, so it doesn't look broken up? Early of drawings by him do. This one is a little bit in that way, but not that much. But these, you can see, there's a study. Possibly this is a study of a horse being held by somebody or just tied to a post or something. Maybe his head kept up by somebody standing there. These things look like they're from antiquity, though, don't they? And that one does. Now, this one could be from another painter. Almost resembles Rosa Bonheur or something. This begins to be a study also from life, as if somebody was holding the horse's head here, and Degas doing the study of which he didn't appear to have as much time as with other ones. So here he is, but he's studying the horses, and the one on the right is a figure. Here it is for this painting, and so some of the old themes, some old historical or mythological themes, totally forgotten this one. But so here's some other horses, and he's doing studies for these pictures. This is very early work by Degas. So from the point of view of draftsmanship, this one here may look flat to you. It's not worked up much. The study for it has more form. Oh, by the way, this is a sketchy version of this too. This isn't the final version of that painting. But I'm going to show you some other paintings that include a couple of these figures, one down here, one over here. And you're going to see also a further conversation about drawing the figure. But just to get the idea across that Degas is drawing horses and he does his homework. He goes and studies horses. And possibly even an actual horse. Now, it's possible when you're drawing an actual horse, if you're working like Ang, you might be having the horse stand there, but you're trying to idealize it. So there might be some work you're doing that makes it look more like something that you saw in a picture that's very typical, shall we say, of some other generation's style. And Ang was really good at that. And, trying, like in drawing one of his odalisques, it's very apparent that he was borrowing Persian art to make the entire painting. Fascinating thing, but Persian types, you might say model types, and then interpretations of fingers and all, just fascinating. That one by Degas that's in the fog is a brilliant thing from that point of view, and from other ways, it's just really amazing painting. Those of you guys out there who think I'm stuck on Impressionism in some way that has to do with a prejudice against other kinds of art, that's not even a little the case. I'm actually a long student of painting, and it's the longer history, the ancient history, that made me even want to participate in this form. Now, later on, Degas, you can see these horses here are almost equivalent to what you see in a bunch of these Muybridge photographs. So later on, he sees Muybridge, the photograph stuff, and he's drawing from them. And maybe, so he's a guy who it does appear that he from time to time has photographs, does drawings from them, and then uses those drawings in his own work. And these things really resemble that. So here again, he's a serious student. But now and by the way, this is a student of the action. These are his early stuff. The horse is all stretched out in different ways. His early stuff shows all the influences of what the masters did. Including Michelangelo. Da Vinci. He's clearly a student of several of those kinds, those horses, shall we say? But when he gets an opportunity, he doesn't have any compunctions, what you think of it or not, whether you approve it in any way or not, about borrowing from the photographs because he's seeing such intriguing phenomena. Just the wildly curious things legs do. You couldn't see that unless you could slow down the action, like snap it in process or in action. But he's also interested in the action idea. So, but you can see the curiousness. Oh, aren't these curious patterns, curious shapes? He's not making them up just to be curious. But what's happening with Degas by this point in his career, he's become a guy who's far more fascinated with the ideas of interesting, per the world of shape, and then the interplay of interesting things like the legs, shall we say, or the sticks in this picture, or the interplay of the elements that are of a kind, right? Now, some people are referring to that as pattern. That's one of the uses of the word pattern. But nevertheless, we're talking about the guy that's just finding new resources. So I'm not recommending it for or against the photograph. I'm simply pointing out to you that we have Degas doing he's letting the photograph just sort of fill in terms of horses at least, fill in what he's never even thought to see before. The rapid movement of the legs is now by Muybridge here. You have stop action. And so you can have a horse moving through here and you can see all the legs all the time, no matter, and the changing positions of the horse. So Degas made himself a student of that sort of thing. So here you are with multiples of them, some of which he turns into pictures. In Degas' case, you would never say he was a guy who had to use photographs to make a good picture. He simply found intriguing abstractions that weren't available any other place. And but in today's generation, people are weak at drawing. They actually haven't done their homework frequently. And I mean, you younger people know who you are, and you know the difference is, it's like the photographs just becomes a slick way into something you can't really do. As Degas would put it, as an interpretation of the 3D world, but you can transfer shape out of a photograph, which is one marvelously different world. I mean, remarkably, noticeably different activity, a different game. Now here he is, a further student. Look at this stuff he's doing. He's really trying to study up these crazy. He's really intrigued by the patterns and shapes of horses. Now I want you to notice when Degas, by the way, like in no other sculptor possibly anywhere near to this degree, his attention to contour line. Remember, he calls himself an impressionist in line, but he appears to be actually just totally fixating on pattern, and the intrigue of these patterns, these shapes. This is a 2D guy, right? A guy who just sees pattern. He knows our world is a two-dimensional world. Ultimately, shape is a two-dimensional problem, right? So form isn't, by the way. Don't misunderstand me about other things related to that. But the idea of contour, the idea that here you're not talking Greek vases and all sorts of intriguing things that we know are significant in creating interest, in creating fun, in creating entertainment. It's one level of entertainment never to be overlooked, right? Degas saying at one point here, it's all silhouettes. Remember that. But here again, you can see draftsmanship in his work, right? This isn't like a guy who's getting his proportions wrong or anything like that. And but it does appear that he's possibly borrowing a great deal of this stuff from Muybridge, and I'm curious to know whether some of these horses were just simply shot in action, like with Muybridge. He's shooting these things sometimes simultaneously from the front and the side, and who knows if other positions are there. I haven't followed up on that. You might. That would be inadequate to at least begin to try to sculpt these things and try to understand. It was Decamp who said, and I'm not fully invested in this idea, but it's Decamp who said, it wouldn't be a bad thing to walk around to the side of your model and look at say, a portrait of a woman, and you're looking at this woman now from the side to see what her form is like. And when you go back around the front, that knowledge is going to be helpful to you. It's possible that's what Degas is thinking. We don't paint out of our head in any case, but we sometimes, by doing that, can tell whether nature has more content than we would have expressed if we didn't understand it. Now, that still doesn't take anything away from the need to actually be able to paint things without exaggeration and without forcing, right, minor points out of their timing, out of their order visual. So here he is with the portrait again, with the figure again, and these all are for. I think each of these is for that picture of the rape of the Sabines or whatever it is. I've forgotten the title of it. And but this is where I'm telling you that this is Degas as a number one an impressionist in line, and secondly and I'll explain what I mean. And secondly as a great draftsman. Now, I'm going to show you in a second construction drawn figures. When you say you're an impressionist in line, so if you're a draftsman and your base is impressionistic, if it's visual, you're not going in there and trying to manufacture the figure and sort out anatomy and all that sort of stuff. You're you're the guy that's delineating the observed, right, just as it is, and the interplay of shape and all that sort of stuff. And don't even think for a second that Michelangelo didn't understand the same things, but you're talking about a line like this, and the way it picks up a continuous line down here or here or whatever. You're talking about that kind of thing that's happening in front of you and the search for that kind of magic that's happening. But here's a guy who's drawing from life, and he's not doing any construction drawing. He's not constructing these figures. He's drawing them from silhouettes. And I'm going to show you the academic model is all this is. And he's putting a little more weight into the values, because he has that, that some urge toward light a little bit at this point, toward form and light, not living in a very shallow range of values, but beginning to pop light effects like here. I don't want to say more about that, but the point is, when you talk about draftsmanship, you're talking about the ability to articulate the shape of an object and to manage what's happening inside it, the form. So, if this is draftsmanship, and so the unity of all the forms, and the continuity of the line, the interplay of the lines, in a truthful rendition of what you see in front of you, beautiful, truthful, whatever you want to say. I don't see anything about these things that isn't great draftsmanship. But all four of these. This one is from the Spartan Boys, I think it's called, or something like that. Spartan Youth. But you can see that these things are simply renderings in the facial. I'm going to call it the facial style, the surface appearance of things. And but this is what I call great draftsmanship. It expresses great form. The proportions are great. The front to back movement of all this sort of stuff. Everything interpretive that's 3D, and the plausibility, the way it hangs together in unity visually. So shapes, proportions, all those basic things, but the whole impression actually giving you that sense of that it's true, and it's unified and true, and secondly probably powerful. Now each of these has a sense of life. They're not weak. They're not each one of them feels like they're extremely well drawn. Now I'm not sure what your definition of drawing would be. You did say what it was. What did you say it was? That you believe it when you see it. That's where this would be very surprising to me if you didn't believe each of these things. They actually have the precise appearance of a figure. If you've drawn a lot of figures, you would know why I say that. So that part, you see this, you believe it. I would think these 4 pictures would be enough to convince you that Degas is a great draftsman. But then to really understand that, as I said about understanding great wines, you need to go look at a lot of draftsmanship, a lot of people who are drawing, and over time, to find your taste, find the elevated, the better versus the less better. There are a lot of good. There's a lot of draftsmen in the history of painting that are good. Degas is special, and that's where, big part of what I'm saying, by the way, as an impressionist, saying he's special is that there's the truth. He's drawing what he sees in front of him with that kind of acuity that's remarkable, given that it's still hanging together just as a preliminary study. If you look at if you look at David, if you look at Ang, you'll see there's a tendency to sometimes borrow from stuff that isn't there and articulate toes or something else by some less than appearance-based modality. That's one of those reasons I elevate this guy. But Ang is brilliantly plausible. The portraits are just amazing. There's a thing about them, of course, where they begin to, in their management, begin to resemble 19th century stylistic things, where Degas is actually, maybe you'd say more of a, and I really hate to use this word, but more of a realist in the sense of let's do it the way it looks. Let's be the manager of, of the truth of nature in front of us in drawing, as opposed to learning the strategies and the proportions and all that sort of stuff of the guys before us. So then here's Degas, though, as you see him getting along. Now, 2 things are happening to him. One is that he's beginning to lose his eyesight, and so I think that's the reason why you see this, the fattening of some of these lines, for example. But this is the one that Heather thought had some part that looked distorted, and I'm not sure what she meant, but I do know, and this is a view looking down on somebody, so there's some curious things that are inevitably there. My experience with studying drawing from life, years of drawing from life, is that this is enormously plausible. It's plausible in every way. All these are. By the way, this gives you an idea that him doing nudes, and then actually clothing them, even though none of these are precisely, I don't think any of these are precisely what you see here. There's more of a turn to the arms here, so this is a slightly rotated view, or at least the arms are different. And this one's different entirely. This is a pure profile type view of this portion, and so on. But this one's somewhat more like what you see in front of you. So in any case, and Degas he didn't have any problem with tracing images. Like you'd have an image like this, he would lay tracing paper on it and then draw some more over that, get it one level removed. Now, what I'm saying, though, about him now is this is where Degas begins to do this thing where he's looking for the curiosities of the figure. And I think to put, and this is all very abbreviated, but it's also, one of those points he makes is how difficult it was for him to see how far under this angle cut in the standing figure. It's very easy when you're drawing as a young student to actually make that much too straight, this angle here, and take the life out of that. And or to miss angles in the legs is very, very easy to do. There's a more straight one by definition, but he's interested in studying the figure as it presents in the 2-dimensional, so the shape world, the contour, the patternistic, now that just in the sense of flat shapes like the Greek vases. That stuff was just completely dominating him by this point. And you'll see more of that as we go down. So then they become figures like this. Now this is where form is incorporated, but so it's sometimes easy for people to look at these and not see pretty girls. But I think this photograph, which was part of his studio at some point, gives an idea what he's trying to do when he has a photograph of a figure. He's trying to he's trying to create a curious abstraction. Another word for that is interesting, right? Paintings need to be interesting. And Degas is not just simply sitting there saying, and maybe it's the age he's in. That is the age of realist novels and things like that. And so slice of life, so what do women really do when they're not posing for you, right? And so And what he's mining that for is the amazing numbers of more curious shapes you can get out of it. And so now he's mining shape because he's abandoned the classic beauty, right? So the girl's not standing there like this with her hip and all that. It's not a classic like that's what a beautiful woman looks like, which was a sort of, you can sense that there's a sort of a standard in the past of beauty. He's now saying, no, interesting is more important, and that kind of beauty is very passing. It's very, what's the right word? Paralyzing, The binds, you can just sense that he's feeling the annoyance of the binds of, you must draw the figure like this, or any of those things. But what he is finding is the intrigue, the curious patterns of shapes and the intrigue of this to this to this to this. These kinds of things that have similar natures. But you see this the heavy influence on getting the maximum out of negative shapes, or out of just odd continuations of a shape. This kind of what would you call that kind of a thing happening right there? This guy is just he's obviously mining shape. And so he doesn't put the model, and he found that putting the model in acts of nature, things they're doing like drawing after the bath or combing their hair, gives him this opportunity. I'm going to suggest it's probably a bunch of this, or some of this certainly is related to having found Japanese painting, or having seen it in some form or another, adopting some aspects of it. But the idea of a snapshot of a person just doing something, and there's that curious wonderfulness about the shape. It's just all of a sudden we stop binding ourselves and forcing ourselves into whatever it is, that binds your age. And now the problem is still going to be unity. It's just not going to be the prettified model, which is a fascinating thing for everybody to wonder about and think about. Heather, with apologies, you see I'm just wandering and not probably answering all your questions in any particular way. But if you talk about draftsman, this is of his real true form interpretation, and it's fascinating as pattern goes. So I don't think the limits of believability, I don't find it unbelievable at all, actually. I find it sometimes unbelievable only to the degree that it's undeveloped, like a hand looking like a nubbin. But then I've seen it so many times since seeing Degas. It's one of those things where you begin to trust, as you would call that, and appreciate a painter is when you actually say, nah, that can't be. Like when I saw the oval egg of a head by Raphael, and I said, no, it was just a formula. And then I saw people in the distance coming toward me, and I saw these 3 eggs coming at me. And that sort of thing happens. You begin to see toes and fingers and all that sort of stuff in their nubbins, so the hand has a ball at some point, right? And that changes everything in terms of the possibilities. So now let's just jump off here for a second. I'm going to talk about construction drawing. This is when you're constructing a figure out of junk pieces and stuff. I was going to say out of junk. That's really not appropriate for me to say that, but I'm showing you this. This is what George Bridgman called it. This is George Bridgman. This is what he calls constructive anatomy, and you can see that he's figured out how to build the arm out of knowledge. He understands what this muscle does and what this muscle does, and what this bone does in the sheath of the tendons and all that. He's figured all that stuff out and is piecing it together. Now, I don't know, but I'm guessing that he's got a model in front of him and he's not building these things from scratch. So I could be wrong, though. In fact, I guess that probably if you've done this enough using the model from life, you would be able to create that figure out of your head. I've looked a bit for his work. I meant to look more in this one, and I haven't found much of anything in terms of paintings that tells me this is the way to go. But to stand in front of the model when you have nature in front of you, and to then think you have to go in and manufacture the figure is to me a curious thing. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where I just wonder why anybody would want to do that amount of work. But in any case, something like that appears to be happening with Michelangelo and so on. And when Da Vinci is doing stuff out of his head, you can see the pieced togetherness of things, right? The horse ain't going to hold still. He's going to have to manufacture in some way. And he, learning joints on horses and what hoofs do and all that sort of stuff and trying to piece them together is very much in that, and needed in the course of manufacturing, or what we call constructing a figure. And imaginative work, though, is not infrequently constructed, and I'll show you an example of that again in a minute. But so here's the river god by Phidias. I think it's on the pediment of the Parthenon. And and the grace, the way that this all hangs together. I mean, you'd call this great draftsmanship in sculpture. And here's Michelangelo, and he was a huge fan of this figure. And I think everybody historically, lots of people, it shows up over and over again in different works. But Kenyon Cox holds this up as an example of one of the great examples of draftsmanship in the history of painting. And what he does, but it has that thing that I was talking about of being pieced together that you're almost stuck with. And even as sculpture has that element till later, it has that element for a while. Now that's typical of all of us when we're trying to draw, even when we're not trying to piece it together constructively, but we're just trying to draw the model. There's a tendency to draw it by the pieces, right? And it winds up looking all broken up. And however he's getting to that, it has a little bit of that quality. And the drawing itself, of course, is now when you do a drawing, I was going to say, is full of busy stuff and has nowhere near the unity. It has an aesthetic unity, but it doesn't have the simple unity of the great forms, for example. And then the little parts, at least the interpretations I've seen. I've got one big print of this, a pretty life-size one. I forget how big that is. Maybe it's only 9 by 12 or something, 8 by whatever. But nevertheless, there's that thing that when you get to Degas, so let's just jump up there again. When you get to Degas, what you're seeing here is this because he's using the model, you get a greater sense of the search for the intrinsic unity of appearances, as opposed to that thing that almost is inevitable of when you find all those parts, and that is that it's there's a tendency for it to rather fall apart. These things hang together in a certain way, but not in a visual way. They hang together they feel like plausible units of anatomy. And all that's fine. That's all good stuff. Just different. So, but what's happening, here's Michelangelo doing one of those, you see how he's constructing, he's trying to understand the figure over here. And I will never gainsay that. But Raphael is very much like Rubens to Van Dyck. Raphael's moving away from the if you want to say the invented figure. It looks to be doing some combination of looking and getting some of the unity of the look of nature, and in part piecing this together by the look of it. Now that's just me interpreting from my eyes. But here's Da Vinci, and the difference between this and this definitely, to me, is a constructed figure. This definitely is not. This is a figure from life. And but you can still see he's piecemeal doing parts and things like that. And that was a model we all had certainly when I was with Gamble. That was very much the model. It wasn't we weren't working from the Velázquez model at that time. And so, but what you can see is the entire 19th century. This is the Julian Academy's 3 teachers, Lefebvre, Boulanger, and Bouguereau. And you can see everything they're doing is visually, it's the outline of things. These aren't constructed figures. And I'm just mentioning that just to talk about construction. And I know it's way beyond what we were talking about, Heather. So if you disappear, I wouldn't blame you at this point. But you get to that place, though, when you're not drawing stuff you think you know, like let's draw the toes, we think we understand them. But even these guys, the academics, are drawing from models standing there, and using these models, making the models stand for a very long time, and drawing from them. So I don't think I want to say more about that, but who knows where this will take us, right? So here's Degas, and here's your Sargent model, and here's Da Vinci. I'm putting them side by side, showing you these are models. All these guys are drawing from life. And this is, of course, the what you call the values model. It's the tonalist model, if you want to call it that. Sargent's painting with charcoal. There are people of his day that were disdaining charcoal because you could do so much. You could create so completely what a painting can do in black and white. And it was, whereas drawing previously had been something that was presumed to have a different purpose. Like this isn't fully masked. Now, if you look at these two here, you wouldn't say this one has a lesser sense of form. Anytime you're doing something like this, though, for a drawing, you may put in just a little bit more information than would be visually there, with a hint of the visual unity of it. But anyway, all of these are drawn from objects sitting in front of them. That's exactly as the whole flow of painting became that and stopped being construction drawing. Why am I talking about that? Well, it came up in a previous video. That's why. So, in any case, yeah, give more examples, though, of why we consider Degas a great draftsman. This is the expression of form. It's the articulation of, I'm talking about form little, form big, and the sense of proportions, shape making, all that sort of stuff, and all of it having the sense of life and the sense of continuity, this unity thing that we talk about. So, yeah. And that's typical of good draftsmen. All three of these guys are good draftsmen. It isn't the time for me to talk about why I elevate Degas over Sargent, but I don't do it by much. In fact, mostly I don't want to even carry on that conversation. There's a tendency for this to be a visual sketch thing, and the search, the sort of that quality of searching for levels and levels and levels of values, but that shouldn't affect the idea that the guy's draftsmanship is good, meaning that the form appears good, the shapes are good, the proportions, the sense of life, the relationships of stuff drawing. By the way, the definition of drawing, I don't know what that is for most people, but draftsmanship is referred to as being skillful in drawing. But drawing, so we used to say that drawing is everything that you can do in the black and white that has nothing to do with the color. And it isn't pictures typically as much as it's the making of an object, the articulation of an object to look, as Heather put it, believable. And each of these easily fit in that category. You could say that visually this one is the Da Vinci is slightly less believable, but it's certainly a damaged picture. Who knows what we have there? It probably was one of those silver points that can seriously suffer. So here again, just using the figure. This is a different approach to form, right? It's full-valued approach to form, where this is more nuanced. So this, if Sargent was doing this is probably a black jacket. He wouldn't have drawn this thing as a white jacket, so to speak, if you follow me. But in the form delivery process, that does all the work you need. The sense of form, the great form is all there. Now again, this is front or tending toward front lit, and this mass-oriented way of working is so much more ideal for creating the form in a chiaroscuro world, losing stuff and being able to set up the power edges, the high contrast shifts right through the middle of these forms, while at the same time you're articulating the shape on the outside. But this is your evidence this is a guy drawing a line instead of a mass over here. But these are just the efficiencies when you're trying to create a drawing for the purposes of a painting. These are just some of the efficiencies the draftsman will use. Today, a lot of people seem to want to think that drawing is its own art. I've never found that those guys who do art drawings are very appealing. I've never found them appealing. I always wonder why they aren't painting. But what I like is what this guy puts together as a drawing, meaning a search for data and an articulation of what he's found for the purposes of a painting. I think it brings a whole new level of intrigue to these things. So this is another portrait of Manet. That previous head was also Manet. But you can see how much the burden is on contour, and not on value shifts, on major value shifts anywhere near as much. So its shape is really the dominant thing. Draw lines, lots of lines was Ang's advice. And then Degas was talking about great composers and great draftsmen. Historically, Millet has been right up there with the top 5 or 6 great draftsmen of all time. So, Heather, I have a suspicion you may not much like this, shall we say. This is far more about the gesture of the figure. Its proportions are good and all that sort of thing, but it's not about the contour line the way a Degas is, or even the way as much as a Sargent is. Now, he doesn't have, these are mostly drawn without figures, so he doesn't have a model standing in front of him. So he draws stuff and he adjusts stuff until it looks plausibly like what nature is providing him. And but still, those are a couple guys. If you want examples of what historically have been considered great draftsmanship, these are a couple of the guys and their work. This is Millet, and this is Corot, who somebody said how he was saying what a great draftsman of trees Corot is. And then he says, and he's an even greater draftsman of the figure. And most people of that era thought his Corot's figures were appalling. And by certain academic standards, you would have said that. But that tells you something that you may want to think about more in terms of what makes draftsmanship. But this is, again, that simple idea of expressing with contour line and form ideas shall we say, the three-dimensional substance, the interpretation on a flat surface of the three-dimensional substance of an object. Drawing is way more than that. But overall, in fact, if you read what I've said before many times, read Hale's book, and I'm running really late here. Read Hale's book where he talks about how color is drawing as well. And he's not the first one who said it. He wasn't the last one who said it. Let's put it that way. So I'm going to leave you all on that note. But think through what draftsmanship is, what it means to you over the course of your life. Look at lots of pictures. Make your decisions after you've seen all those guys that have been sort of labeled by good painters over time as great draftsmen. Look at their work, study it, and look at all work, study it all. And I would just say do one thing, though, above all, and that is just lose the idea that we're talking about people drawing from photographs. There's no comparison. There's a different world going on out there. And the art world of today is a different one, but and particularly when it comes to drawing. Drawing is the interpretation of the three-dimensional world that you're seeing with your eyes. The three-dimensional world, as you see it with your eyes, it's the interpretation of that. And in the process, or in the goal of manufacturing the sense of form, the gesture, the life, and all those things, which you see Degas pursuing in his horse ones at the beginning. All right, Heather, and I'm just rambling off, but this has been long, and I hope you guys had some fun out of it. As I said before, I'll jump up to them again. The previous times that I've done these videos are going to be on the next slide here. I'll just leave that up for you. I just talked about drawing, and I think there's at least 3 or 4 other places where I've talked about it too. And I also have that demonstration of how I approach drawing with the horse one. Sorry, I don't have that here, but these are ones that might be useful to you over time. All right, at least understand me and what my thinking is. Remember, everything I'm doing is really trying just to get a conversation going, to get you thinking about it in ways maybe you haven't, but I've been here searching this out. As Degas says, even on understanding, when do you arrive? You don't arrive. You keep on searching it out. So in speaking to Heather, I'm saying to you, Heather, just keep on looking at what's called great draftsmanship. Think about it. Why is Delacroix a great draftsman? I didn't include him in this. Why is he considered that? Daumier and all those guys. You'd probably say very similar things about them. What in the heck is the nature of draftsmanship? And think that through. You won't find much help in the dictionary or the encyclopedia in trying to sort that out. It's a term of, what should we say? It's a term of art that belongs uniquely to painters. So almost every time I see a painter and we talk about draftsmanship, we can agree about certain pictures, but we can't agree with words about what we mean. All right, I'm out of here. Thank you again. You guys have a great week or two. I hope you enjoy Christmas if I don't talk to you before that. All right.